thanks for joining us today at in the control room. How are you doing this morning? I guess where you're from.
Yeah, I'm great. Nice to be here, and looking forward to having the conversation.
Yeah, no, we appreciate your time. I know you are founder and CEO of Kelvin. Can you give us a little bit background in terms of how you founded Kelvin, when, and sort of what led to where you are this day with Kelvin?
Totally. So yeah, I am the son of an entrepreneur and the grandson of an entrepreneur, and have spent a lot of time thinking about how to build companies. That being said, I sort of resisted that temptation for a long time. One of the challenges of being the child of an entrepreneur is the sort of ebbs and flows of that. There are good days and bad days, but not a lot of predictability. And so early in my career, I really wanted things that were more stable. Yet over time, what I really missed was sort of the building of something. Even though I worked in finance and in investing, what I found was I was doing more editing than authoring, if you will. And it was a different level of satisfaction. So I wanted to be able to help create something and have something that actually had a lot of impact. And so I did my senior thesis in college on carbon credit trading policy. So I had a lot of awareness around some of the potential for economics and public policy and otherwise to work together to solve interesting problems. And then sort of as we, fast forward to today, when we look at Kelvin, I feel like we're in a place where we're using technology and policy to have some really positive impacts on the broader world. And so it's nice to be able to sort of think about things I was working on, 25 years ago around time when we were just beginning to understand what could be done in terms of air quality and otherwise, and global, greenhouse gas emissions, to today when a lot of this has become really important and real for a whole nother generation. And so it's fun to sort of see some of those concepts, get brought to bear here.
Let's unpack that, because you mentioned a lot of really interesting things here. So obviously it's always fun to build, but you also talk about sustainability, and it sounds like I would think, especially within areas like manufacturing, energy, certainly, really any industrial setting, when you go to tackle sustainability, you also find solutions to other problems, I would think. Did you find that the case? And
sure.
So what kind of...
It's a great question. And I think it's part and parcel to what we're trying to do, which is recognizing that every company that we interact with has at least two different objectives that they're trying to balance, right? One is, I need to continue to produce profitably. I need to to have my successful sort of business case around what it is that I'm creating and producing. Right. And then I need to also balance that today with much more awareness around the impact of that process on the environment. And that can be in the form of, certainly with oil and gas, we spend a lot of time thinking about emissions and how do we reduce, sort of the potential methane that's out there. But with other manufacturers, particularly with folks who are producing things where there's a high degree of plastic use, like how do we minimize, the waste there so that we're super efficient around those types of products? And then just energy efficiency overall, like how do we continue to manage these systems so that we're not being wasteful? Because it's something that, again, across all of these industries. So then how do I balance those two things, right? How do I balance that kind of production maximization and profitability with something that actually is different, right? And sort of those can be very conflicting types of objectives.
Sure. It's interesting you say the way you also phrase that, because I couldn't agree more. I think one of the things that you often hear is there's a need to be mindful around resources, around doing things more efficiently. And often it doesn't translate to even the workforce and finding ways to more efficiently optimize the workforce, which is a huge challenge within manufacturing, engineering. I mean, all of these titles and all of these areas within technical branches, you have a lot of retirement that's occurring. You have a lot of institutional knowledge just walking out of the door. Do you see that as part of the larger sustainability conversation?
100%.
And like, what is your perspective in terms of how to, because from 50,000 feet up, it looks like they're two separate problems with two different solutions, two separate solutions. Do you see that the case, or do you see is like there's a way to jump in and use more of a common approach towards solving the entire sustainability?
Yeah, no, I think it's the confluence of both, in the sense that the expertise that resides within the brains of so many of these, excellent engineers today, isn't necessarily something that has been properly codified. And so if they leave, for retirement or, another opportunity, that knowledge and that expertise goes away as well. And that means that potentially problems that they had solutions for in their heads are not actually going to be solved as easily. And so what does that do? Well, that can reduce the sustainability of that operation, because you're potentially fumbling around trying to rediscover, a solution that you already had. And so if we can help with both an understanding of how those problems are solved today, and we capture those concepts, in co-pilots and other software, so that knowledge is truly institutionalized, you start to address one piece. And then the other aspect of that too is there are some extraordinary engineers who may be within that organization, but could be somewhere else perhaps, where if their knowledge could be applied to that organization, they could become more efficient. And so it's like, how do I go gather kind of the best and the brightest potential solutions that come from these people and present that in a way that's going to actually be able to drive impact in the business? I think that that's a key part of the sustainability goals that we have. And then, yes, those can be applied directly to specific areas around methane emissions, plastic reduction, energy efficiency, some of these other things. But just more broadly, it's like, if the knowledge leaves the building, is the business going to truly be sustained or not? And I think that what we're trying to address, and in many cases, maybe it's not. So how do we sort of, capture that information so that the company can continue to run well?
So you brought up co-pilots, and for our viewers out there that may not know, could you elaborate a little bit more about co-pilots and Kelvin co-pilots and how it can help actually perform tackle these challenges?
For sure. So today, the Copilot is really, it is the software instantiation of what the engineer does on their best day. So the idea is best engineer on their best day. How do we capture what they do in a software application? And that's important, because what we do is we look at ways in which we can gather that information in those applications and be in a position then you can kind of scale them across the organization. But it starts with that first kind of capturing of those best practices. And what we'd like to believe is most engineers are spending time on a combination of some mundane tasks, some things that aren't terribly complicated, but are still important. And then some higher order, potentially more kind of transformative types of problems that they're trying to address. And what we want to do is we want to say, let's take on the mundane stuff. And that can be, those can be co-pilots for Kelvin, so that those co-pilots can then run in the background while the engineers are freed up to go focus on the more complex and challenging problems where the software is probably not going to be, necessarily equipped today to be able to solve that. So it's really creating more assistance and then leverage for those engineers so they can accomplish more, still with the confidence that things are going to run as well as they would if that person was still keeping an eye on that process and actively managing it.
I was touring a plant about a year and a half ago for a colleague of mine who was a plant manager, and they manufacture plastics and plastic valves and connectors that go into different type of medical equipment, right, and different types of equipment, industrial, which requires a lot of tailored focus, subject matter expertise, but then it also requires a lot of manual labor, like manual processes, manual transition of data from one source that's static to another source that's static. Is that what you mean by mundane in terms of capturing the manual, or is it, does it go further than just that sort of view?
A lot of what I see is that many of the day-to-day tasks that an engineer is working on involve some event detection and then workflow automation. So it's if this happens, if pressure goes above this level, then I need to take the following 3 steps, right? Turn this down, modify that, and otherwise. So it's that combination of, oh, there's something that's changed, and then these are the actions I'm going to take to move it back either to the previous state, because maybe that's where you want it, that's your steady state, or I'm going to take it to another state. That's one part of it. But the idea is that every process exists in different states. There can be I'm turning it on, and as I'm ramping that thing up, I'm keeping I'm watching certain variables to make sure that, I don't get things running too fast, or too hot, or whatever that dynamic might be. And then once I achieve kind of that steady state, what can I do to maintain it? Because sometimes that's what I'm looking to do. And then oftentimes as well, maybe I need to turn it back down because we're going to do some scheduled maintenance or otherwise. But it's a recognition that you have processes in different states. And every time there's a state change, there's some set of actions that needs to happen. And it needs to happen usually in a pretty prescribed set of prescribed set of steps, so that person isn't going to disrupt that system. Right. And run it safely and securely and otherwise through that. So if you can have software that does that, so rather than having to, identify the event and then take the steps, if it's watching it saying, oh, I can identify, the software is able to identify that, the co-pilot can then take over and say, got it. I know now what to do in this instance. I can be in a position to take the following actions. And again, make those types of closed loop control decisions that are actually going to drive the outcome that's desired.
So actually, that's a good transition for a segment I like to call the 5 and under 5. So tell me what you would want to let CISO know most importantly about co-pilots and how AI can really help their day-to-day. CISO who has some experience or coverage on the operating technology side can use Kelvin to help manage the fact that the assets that they're now responsible for can be impacted by software, and in both a positive and a negative way. And I think we see the example with CISOs as the worst case is Stuxnet, right? Where you see a situation where something has come through and made active changes to a system and tried to break it down. What we're working on now is an ability to, frankly, partner with some of the other leading IT vendors in the space who are helping with those types of event detection that are attacks coming in from that side, and actually be able to create a solution that works on the OT side as well. Because when there are changes to certain processes, you can identify that's a bad actor, right? And so we can help on the security side of that, which also has knock-on effects in terms of safety. So we look at the CISOs care about security first and safety arguably second. And we can be in a position where those co-pilots can be designed to look out for bad behavior and in certain cases, hopefully prevent that bad actor from impacting the underlying systems. What about COOs?
COOs, Carol, their goal is to be able to maintain operations, achieve, key performance indicators, and typically have some sort of, goals around the production, efficiency and profitability of the business. And what we can do is absolutely align with those objectives. So understanding kind of what are the goals and how do we measure those goals is one part of it. And that's absolutely kind of what our co-pilots are designed to help do. And then be able to action those in the form of software that can be scaled across the operation. So rather than having to hire more people as your business grows, we feel like there's an opportunity to leverage the workforce as it stands and get more of it. And then the other thing is, as I mentioned before, bring in the expertise potentially externally that can solve key problems, but do that in a way that is sustainable and scalable across the organization. That's the other piece that from a COO perspective, we are very, very well equipped to help with the true operations and the operational technology of that business.
What about CTOs? Because chief technology officers have they sort of sit between the CISO and the COO in many ways within their day-to-day. How do you see Kelvin be able to jump in and leverage AI and machine learning in order to help the IT/OT challenges that a CTO would have?
Well, I think today the CTOs have a lot of tools already that exist for the IT side. And unfortunately, many of those tools are lacking on the OT side. So what we're trying to do is in some ways like upskill the tool sets that exist and the capabilities of those tools on the OT side. More of the world is, we believe that software is eating the world, quoting Andreessen, and we believe that there's still a very strong hardware orientation that exists on the OT side. So our ability to use software to make that more accessible and easier to use makes the CTO's job easier, because then they can have more consistency across what is the experience of an IT administrator that's trying to influence OT, infrastructure. Well, that's something we can help with. And we believe that it's something also that oftentimes that CTO still has some security responsibilities and other performance objectives. We can help with that too. So it's the ability to bring these different concepts together that we think is very important. So
that's awesome. CFOs, unsung hero.
It's profitability and it's sustainability goals. Like if you look at, so profitability for sure, how do we do more with less, right? With, that's one aspect. How do we maintain our operations from a financial perspective? That's another. And then how do we actually appropriately report on our existing infrastructure as it relates to new sustainability goals? Because we just saw this, for example, where the SEC is putting out new guidance around the fact that we're going to have to do more reporting around sustainability initiatives. And the CFO is going to be in some ways accountable for signing off on what those numbers are. Yeah. So we're in a position where we can help give them additional information around how those assets are truly performing, aggregate that and bring it up to be able to share. I mean, there's other software companies that are making their business around aggregating that information and creating reporting. We think we can be the feedstock for a number of those OT environments to make sure that they're accurately rendering that information up.
That's awesome. Great. That's excellent. What about the last but not least, the CEO?
CEO is going to have, again, objectives around profitability, growth, and sustainability right now. Like those are three big areas. And we absolutely believe that we can help enhance the profitability of the operation. We know that folks are going to be able to continue to grow and grow faster with Kelvin because there's just more scalability in the software we've built. And lastly, just on the sustainability initiatives, giving them opportunities to be able to more directly impact whether or not it's methane objectives that drive these goals, potential energy efficiency objectives, as well as some of these other, things like plastic usage or other externalities and waste that are in the system. How do they reduce those objectives? Those are all things that we have co-pilots that can that are designed to go out there and help address. So those line up very nicely, typically with what a CEO cares about today.
Do you think Kelvin, would also with the CEO help that relationship in terms of reporting up to the board level with how to better the steps that they are taking within their organization to improve operational efficiency, decrease risk, drive sustainability. So there's the conversation there. So it sounds like Kelvin could also, or at least the person Kelvin has could satiate some pain points for board discussions from a C-level.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, again, I think most organizations are going to start to articulate very clear goals on sustainability. And those are going to be varying, across industry. But in the manufacturing spaces that we care about, they're going to come back oftentimes to things like energy efficiency, externalities in terms of what products are they producing that are, plastics and things. And because those vary, there's not a single solution that cuts across everything. So you need the ability to understand that operation and then be able to figure out how to make it as efficient as possible. And do that in software, because it's not sufficient to just have to do that with more consultants coming in and providing advisory plans. It needs to turn into something that is actionable. And that's where I believe we sit at this really great spot where it's I have an idea, I have an insight around something to improve. Now I need to action it. and like we're that action, right? And then once that action is taken, we can then measure the impact of it. It's also recognition, like what we do is, collaborative control, which is like, how do I bring the people together, operators and engineers, to have a shared understanding of what's going on? How do I make sure I'm also utilizing, the information that's available to be able to help make the best decision possible? And then once that's happened, then how is that going to end up? How do I make that a control decision and series of control decisions to improve the operation? It's that intersection of collaboration and control that we feel like is really the big opportunity ahead. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everything.